I heard my boss laugh in Japanese as he whispered to the CEO, "Once he trains his replacement, fire him. Don't pay a dime." They thought I couldn't understand, that I was just another disposable worker. What they didn't know was that I had lived in Tokyo for 6 years, fluent in every word they spat out. Greed had blinded them. Envy had poisoned them. Arrogance made them careless. I stayed silent, smiled, and nodded as if nothing pierced me. But inside, I was already planning. And when I finally moved, their empire would shatter from within. I had given this company everything. For 15 years, I had walked into the glass tower before sunrise and left long after the lights dimmed across the city's skyline. They called me the backbone of payroll, the man who made the numbers sing. I had built the system they used from scratch, saving them millions each quarter, smoothing chaos into order. Yet behind all that recognition lay nothing more than a polite smile and a pat on the back. I told myself it was fine. That hard work would eventually be seen. I believed loyalty still had meaning. Most nights ended the same way. I would unlock the front door, shoes dragging, shoulders slumped from endless hours. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My daughter's door was half open, her little lamp still glowing, but she was already asleep, clutching the teddy bear I had given her. My wife sat at the kitchen table with a book she wasn't really reading. She would look up, her eyes tired. "Do you even belong to this family anymore, Ethan?" she once asked, her voice steady but breaking beneath the words. I didn't answer. I kissed my daughter's forehead through the darkness and pretended the silence was just another tax I had to pay for success. At work, I poured myself into projects no one else wanted. I solved issues in days that consultants couldn't untangle in weeks. I thought my diligence would be my shield. Instead, it became the very thing they sharpened against me. One Monday morning, my boss pulled me aside. He smiled, too wide, and said, "Ethan, we'd like you to start training someone new. He'll be shadowing you for the next few weeks." No explanation. No discussion of role changes. Just an order delivered like small talk. The young man arrived the next day. Sharp suit, eager eyes, notebook open before he even sat down. He called me sir, which only made me feel older, less necessary. I told myself this was normal, that companies prepared for the future. But in the back of my mind, I wondered, if I was the one building the future, where did that leave me? That week, I noticed my name missing from a project update. The payroll adjustment I had devised was now credited to someone else. A casual oversight, they said. Yet when the report reached the executive floor, my contribution had been erased. My colleagues patted the other man on the back, congratulating him. I sat in the corner, invisible. One evening, my mother called. She was 80 now, her voice thin but steady. "Ethan," she said, "why is it you've never been promoted after all these years? Your cousins, they're managers, directors, and you work harder than all of them." I laughed softly, told her things were fine. But when I hung up, her words clung to me like smoke. She had put me through college, believed I would rise, and here I was, a loyal servant waiting for scraps. The betrayal cut deeper when I discovered the truth about a colleague I had trusted for years. He used to share coffee breaks with me, talk about his kids, ask for advice. One afternoon, I walked past the conference room and saw him inside with my boss, presenting my data as if it were his own. Later, I confirmed it. He had been sending private reports, cutting me out piece by piece. The look of guilt on his face when our eyes met told me everything. He didn't even try to explain. Not long after, I found myself excluded from a major meeting. It was about a system upgrade I had designed, but no one invited me. The replacement I was training walked in with my boss, carrying my slides. I stood outside the glass wall, watching strangers discuss months of my work as though I didn't exist. For the first time, I felt like a ghost in my own career. The final insult came with a report they asked me to sign. Numbers that didn't add up, adjustments that smelled like fraud. My boss slid the paper across the desk, smiling as if we shared a secret. Just sign, Ethan. It'll keep everything smooth. My hand hovered over the pen. If I signed, I would be complicit. If I refused, I might be marked as a problem. Survival or integrity, there was no safe choice. Then, in one of those endless meetings where my presence was barely acknowledged, something unexpected happened. A folded slip of paper slid across the table and stopped by my hand. I opened it discreetly, my heart tightening. Written in careful strokes of Japanese characters were words that froze my blood. After he finishes, he will disappear. I looked up, scanning the room. No one seemed to notice. My boss was speaking, his eyes briefly meeting mine, cold and sharp, like he already knew I understood nothing. But I did. Every character, every meaning. And in that moment, I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They were planning my erasure. I smiled faintly, sliding the paper into my pocket, pretending it meant nothing. But inside, a seed had been planted. They believed greed, envy, and arrogance would let them crush me quietly. They didn't know I had already heard their laughter, understood their whispers, and was quietly taking notes. The meeting ended, but the words on that slip of paper burned in my pocket like a hot coal. I knew then that what I had overheard before wasn't just arrogance. It was a plan, deliberate and cruel. Days later, I stood outside the executive boardroom, pretending to wait for someone. My boss had gone inside with the CEO, speaking in Japanese, smug in their belief that no one else could follow. Their voices filtered through the crack of the half-closed door. "He's just a pawn," my boss said. "When he's done training, we'll cut him loose. No severance." The CEO chuckled, low and approving. "Make sure the system is ours before he's gone. Then no one will remember his name." For a moment, my chest felt hollow, as if every year I had given this company was being erased in front of me. But something else rose alongside the anger. Clarity. My boss wasn't acting alone. The CEO, the man I had once respected as the steward of the company, was not just aware, but complicit. The betrayal ran higher, wider, deeper than I had imagined. That night, when I got home, my wife was waiting in the living room. She looked at me as I set my briefcase down. "You've been so quiet lately. What's going on at work?" she asked softly. I sat on the couch, staring at the floor. I wanted to tell her everything, that my career was under attack, that men I had trusted were laughing over my destruction. Instead, I just shook my head. "It's nothing," I said, forcing a smile. But she saw the distance in my eyes, the weight pressing on me. She didn't push, but her silence was heavier than her questions. The next morning, I stared at my reflection in the office bathroom mirror. My hands clenched the sink, veins pulsing, jaw tight. I could expose them now, shout the truth, take the paper to HR or to the press. But what would that bring? They were powerful, and I had nothing but my word. Without proof, I'd be the bitter man accusing his betters, easily discarded. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted justice, I needed patience. I needed evidence. So I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and began to work with trembling fingers. I accessed the payroll system I had designed, my own creation, and started copying data. Every adjustment, every irregular entry, every time someone had forced the numbers to bend, I preserved it all, carefully, quietly. As the files grew, so did the weight of what I was uncovering. They had been stealing for years, shifting funds, hiding bonuses. My eyes narrowed. It wasn't just betrayal. It was rot at the core. At home, I began teaching my daughter small lessons disguised as games. One night, as she drew pictures on the kitchen table, I said, "Sweetheart, when you do something good, like help a friend or tell the truth, what should you do?" She shrugged. I smiled. "You keep proof. You keep your drawings, your stories. Because someday, someone might try to say you didn't do them. And then you'll have the truth." She giggled, not understanding the gravity, but I knew I was speaking more to myself than to her. The more I dug, the clearer it became. The fraud wasn't just my boss's scheme. Buried deep in the records were signatures, electronic approvals linked to the CEO himself. Adjustments funneled funds into shell accounts. It was greed, layered and systematic. My boss wasn't the mastermind. He was just another pawn, dancing for a larger puppeteer. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. While combing through access logs late at night, I noticed an unusual pattern. Someone else had been downloading data too. Someone from higher up. A senior manager known for his polished reputation. At first, I thought it was another enemy closing in. But then I saw the encryption, the discrete tags hidden in the files. This person wasn't covering for the fraud. They were collecting evidence, just like me. I wasn't alone. Somewhere inside this corrupt machine, another dissenter was working quietly, risking everything. That realization steadied me. The loneliness that had threatened to crush me eased, replaced by a faint glimmer of solidarity. But it also meant the danger was greater. If the CEO or my boss discovered us, neither of us would walk away unscathed. Late one evening, after my wife and daughter had gone to bed, I sat in my study, lit only by the glow of the monitor. I drafted an email in Japanese, careful, precise, every character sharp as a blade. It was addressed anonymously to the regional director, the one man above my CEO. I told him there were irregularities, that numbers had been doctored, that evidence existed. I didn't sign my name. Instead, I added a line only someone who had lived in Tokyo would know. A cultural nuance that gave the message weight. A man who steals rice from the pot cannot hide the smoke of the fire. I hovered over the send button, my heart hammering. If the email was traced, I was finished. If it was ignored, nothing would change. But if it landed, it could be the first crack in the fortress. My finger pressed down. The screen blinked. The message was gone, sent into the dark. I leaned back, exhaling, the faintest smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in weeks, I felt less like prey and more like a player. They thought I was blind, deaf, expendable, but the truth was spreading quietly, invisibly, like water seeping into the cracks of stone. And when the flood came, they wouldn't be able to stop it. The summons arrived on a Friday morning, short and cold, mandatory meeting. Conference room B, 9 a.m. When I stepped inside, I knew exactly what was coming. My boss sat at the head of the table, smug and composed, while the CEO lingered near the window, arms folded. A few other managers filled the seats, eyes down, already complicit in their silence. "Ethan," my boss began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "we've reviewed your recent performance. There are concerns you're not meeting the company's expectations. Your inability to adapt is holding back progress. This cannot continue." My pulse pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Not meeting expectations?" I said, each word deliberate. "I built the system you're using. I saved this company millions." The CEO stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "Systems change. People must change with them. Unfortunately, not everyone can keep up." They wanted to frame me as obsolete, a relic. The irony was almost unbearable. I was the one still pushing the company forward while they rotted it from the inside. Before I could respond, the door opened. The regional director stepped in. My boss froze, his confident posture faltering. The director's eyes swept the room, then landed on me. He greeted the table in English, but suddenly turned, switching to flawless Japanese. "Ethan-san?" he asked. "How long have you been managing the payroll system?" The air shifted. My boss blinked, caught off guard. He had never heard me speak Japanese. The CEO leaned back, frowning. I answered smoothly, in the same language, my voice steady. "For 15 years. I designed every line, every safeguard, every log." Gasps echoed across the room. My boss's jaw dropped. The CEO's frown deepened, his lips pressed thin. I watched their arrogance drain away, replaced by a dawning realization. They had underestimated me completely. For the first time in weeks, I felt the power tilt. My mind raced. I could unveil the evidence now, dump every file onto the table, watch them burn. Or I could hold back, keep building the case until even the board couldn't deny it. My decision wasn't just about revenge, it was about timing. So I smiled, just a faint, mysterious curl of the lips, enough to unsettle them, to suggest I knew more than they imagined. My boss shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The CEO's hands tightened behind his back. They were rattled, and I hadn't even played my card yet. That afternoon, while the building buzzed with rumors of what had happened, I returned to my office, closed the blinds, and began the next phase. I accessed the hidden logs of the payroll system, the parts only I knew existed. Every falsified adjustment, every diversion of funds, every signature forged by those above me. All of it surfaced in long, damning lines of code. I captured it, encrypted it, stored it in multiple locations. The truth was no longer theirs to bury. As I worked, I discovered something I hadn't anticipated. The fraud wasn't confined to my boss or even the CEO. The logs pointed to approvals from the board itself. The corruption had seeped into the highest levels of the company. They hadn't just wanted me gone to cover their crimes. They needed me erased to keep the entire tower from collapsing. When I finally shut my laptop, hours had passed. The weight of the evidence sat heavy on my chest, but so did a strange calm. I had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. That evening, I drove home under the soft glow of streetlights. My daughter ran to the door when I walked in, her small arms wrapping around my waist. I knelt, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Did you do the right thing today, Daddy?" she asked innocently, echoing words I had once told her. I pressed my lips to her temple and whispered, "Yes, I did the right thing." For the first time in months, it felt true. Later, as the house settled into silence, I checked my phone. A new message blinked in my inbox, no name attached, Just a single sentence. You've touched something far bigger than you realize. Be careful. My heart stilled. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew exactly what I was doing. I stared at the screen. The faint smile from earlier returning, despite the chill creeping up my spine. They thought they were hunters, circling their prey. They didn't realize the trap was already closing. The storm broke faster than I expected. On Monday morning, headlines blazed across every financial site. Payroll fraud allegations rock corporate giant. Articles detailed irregularities in the company's financial reports, whispers of embezzlement, and unnamed insiders exposing corruption at the highest levels. I knew some of those files came from me, but not all. Someone else had leaked documents, someone with access beyond mine. I wasn't the only saboteur inside these walls. The effect was immediate. Clients called to pause contracts. Investors demanded answers, dumping shares as if they carried disease. By noon, the stock price plunged, erasing billions in value. The CEO released a statement about misunderstandings and clerical errors, but his words only fueled suspicion. Panic rippled through the building. Colleagues whispered in hallways, glancing at one another as if betrayal could be written on skin. That evening, I sat at home with my daughter curled beside me on the couch. She had been watching cartoons, but her eyes wandered to the news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Daddy," she said softly, "are they talking about your company?" I muted the television. She looked at me, searching for an answer. I took her small hand in mine and said, "Sometimes, sweetheart, when people do wrong, it takes time for the truth to show. Justice doesn't come quickly, but when it does, it's strong." She nodded, leaning her head against my arm, content with that truth, even if she didn't fully understand it. The next day brought another blow. Police cars lined the street outside our headquarters, their flashing lights reflecting off the glass facade. Officers from the Economic Crimes Division streamed inside, their presence sending waves of fear through the staff. Files were seized, hard drives packed away. The fortress they had built around their lies was crumbling from the outside in. Inside, chaos ruled. Employees huddled in corners, speculating. Some deleted emails frantically, others pretended to work, eyes darting to the elevators. But the real damage came when the talented ones, the engineers, the analysts, the few who still believed in honest work, began to resign in clusters. They weren't going to sink with this ship. The rumors spread quickly. People admitted, in hushed voices, that they had known about adjustments for years, but had been threatened into silence. Stories surfaced of managers leaning on them, promising promotions for compliance, punishment for resistance. The fear that had kept them obedient was now unraveling. With the police inside, silence no longer offered protection. By Thursday, the CEO and my boss were both summoned for questioning. I watched them leave the building, their expensive suits doing little to hide the sweat on their brows. The arrogance I had once seen in them was gone, replaced by desperation. They had thought they could bury me, erase me, but now they were the ones struggling for air as the dirt closed in. That night at home, my daughter pointed to the television again. News anchors discussed the scandal, replaying footage of officers escorting executives into black cars. "Why is everyone talking about your company, Daddy?" she asked, eyes wide. I swallowed hard. "Because, sweetheart, when people lie and cheat, the truth always finds them. No matter how high they climb, the fall will come." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, as if she sensed there was more to the story than I let on. Then she returned to her drawing, scribbling bright colors while I sat there, feeling the weight of both pride and dread. Later that night, long after my family had gone to sleep, I heard a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. My chest tightened. When I opened it, there stood my former boss. His tailored suit was rumpled, his tie askew, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. He looked nothing like the man who once sneered at me across polished conference tables. "Ethan," he rasped, voice hoarse with desperation, "we need to talk." For a long moment, I said nothing. The man who had plotted my erasure was now standing at my door, undone by the very trap he had built. I should have felt triumph, satisfaction. Instead, what I felt was something colder. The realization that the game was not yet over. If he was here, then there was more. Something deeper than either of us had imagined. The man at my doorstep looked nothing like the polished executive who once smirked over my shoulder. His face sagged with exhaustion, his eyes darting nervously toward the quiet street behind him. For a moment, I considered slamming the door in his face. Instead, I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, shoulders hunched, voice breaking as he said, "Ethan, I need your help." From the hallway, I heard my wife's sharp whisper, "Who is it?" I turned just enough to see her frightened eyes, urging her and our daughter back into the bedroom. "Stay there," I said gently, though my tone left no room for argument. The door shut softly, leaving me alone with the man who had once planned my downfall. He lowered himself onto the edge of the couch like a man twice his age. "I know what you think of me," he began, fingers trembling. "You're right. I betrayed you. But I wasn't in control. None of us were. The CEO. He's worse than you know. He owns us, Ethan. Every move I made, every order I followed, it was because he had leverage on me. On all of us." I studied him carefully. The arrogance I had despised was gone. What sat before me was a broken man stripped of pretense. Part of me wanted to relish it, to remind him of the slip of paper, the mocking whispers in Japanese. Another part, quieter but harder to ignore, felt something closer to pity. "You had a choice," I said finally. "You could have stood up. Instead, you sold me out." He shook his head, almost violently. "You don't understand. He threatened my family, my son's scholarship, my wife's medical records. He keeps files on everyone. He knew exactly where to strike." His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw not an enemy, but another victim caught in the same web. The room was silent except for his labored breathing. My mind spun. Could I forgive him? Or was forgiveness a weakness, a betrayal of my own suffering? I had fought too hard to get here, but was there strength and compassion too? Before I could decide, he leaned forward, whispering as though the walls might be listening. "The CEO isn't the top. He answers to someone else, an investor group, faceless, untouchable. They control more than this company. They've buried dozens of men like you. If you strike him down, they'll still be there." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet choking all the same. My victory, the unraveling of my enemies, suddenly seemed smaller. A single battle in a war I hadn't even known existed. He left not long after, shuffling into the night like a condemned man. I stood at the window long after his figure disappeared, wondering if what he had told me was confession, manipulation, or a desperate blend of both. In the days that followed, the pressure only mounted. The investigation widened. The company teetered, and whispers grew louder. Yet something else stirred beneath the surface, something I'd been nurturing quietly. I wasn't alone. Anonymous messages reached me, encouragement, shared files, subtle signals that others were watching the collapse with the same determination. There was a network, fragile but real, of people who wanted to cleanse this rot from the inside. They were accountants, managers, even board members, tired of being puppets. One evening, as I sorted through a fresh trove of files, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice faint but resolute. "Ethan," she said, "your father once worked in a place like that. He saw things, terrible things, but he never spoke. He thought silence would protect us. It didn't. You've done what he never dared to do. I am proud." Her words pierced me, filling the hollow places I hadn't known were still empty. Yet with pride came another weight. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that exposing everything would not just bring down the guilty, it would scorch the innocent too. Hundreds of employees, men and women, who had no part in the corruption, could lose their jobs, their pensions, their futures. Could I live with that blood on my hands, even if it was collateral damage in a righteous cause? That night, I sat in the dim glow of my study, staring at the files. My daughter's laughter drifted faintly from the other room, pure and untainted. I was torn between duty and mercy, between justice and destruction. Then another message arrived on my screen. Not anonymous this time, but clear. "The board is meeting tomorrow. They will decide the company's fate. You must choose. Release what you have or keep it buried." I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me. For weeks I had moved like a man on rails, certain of my direction. Now the path split. Whatever decision I made would ripple far beyond me. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. "If I act," I whispered to the silence, "the industry itself may change. If I don't, the rot will live on." The cursor blinked back at me, patient, waiting. Tomorrow, I would decide. Not just the company's fate, but the future of everyone caught in its shadow. The board meeting came and went in a storm of accusations and denials. Files were revealed, names exposed, and the company that had once stood untouchable was forced to bend under the weight of its own corruption. I watched from a distance, not as an employee anymore, but as a man who had survived. By the end of that month, I handed in my resignation, not out of defeat, but out of choice. I would no longer serve a machine built on deceit. Weeks later, I started at a new company. From the first day, the difference was unmistakable. Decisions were transparent, meetings open, voices valued. On my second morning, I discovered the truth behind its foundation. The firm had been created by others like me, people who had once been betrayed, chewed up, and cast aside by the very systems they helped build. Survivors of greed who now dedicated themselves to building something better. For the first time in years, I felt I was not standing alone, but among those who understood the scars I carried. Life at home changed too. I no longer left before dawn or returned after midnight. One crisp autumn morning, I walked my daughter to school. Her small hand gripped mine as we crossed the street, the sun warming our faces. She looked up at me, beaming. "You're here, Daddy. Really here." My chest tightened with something I hadn't felt in years, peace. But peace was not permanence. One evening, as I checked my emails before bed, a new message appeared. This one was from an unfamiliar company, struggling with whispers of financial abuse, pleading for help. The subject line was simple: We heard what you did. We need you." My heart quickened. Justice was not finished. It never was. Meanwhile, the empire I had left behind continued to collapse, only to rise again in another form. Under pressure from regulators, investors, and public fury, the company underwent a brutal restructuring. Executives were removed, processes rebuilt, oversight tightened, and in the most unexpected twist, my former boss, the man who had once betrayed me, reappeared in the news. He wasn't in a boardroom anymore. Instead, he was working at a community shelter, sleeves rolled up, serving food to families who had nothing. Perhaps guilt had transformed him, or perhaps ruin had humbled him. Either way, he was no longer the man who had once plotted in shadows. The day of my daughter's birthday came, bright with balloons and laughter. For the first time in years, I was there from beginning to end. Lighting candles, watching her laugh as she opened gifts, holding my wife's hand as we sang together. The small moments I had traded away for deadlines and empty promises were finally mine again. But the ripples of what had begun in one boardroom spread far beyond my home. Reports of corruption crackdowns emerged across the industry. Whistleblowers stepped forward in other companies, emboldened by what had happened. A movement stirred, quiet at first, then louder, against the culture of silence that had allowed greed to fester unchecked. I had been one voice, but now there were many. And yet, even as I watched the tide turn, I knew the fight was endless. For every truth exposed, another lie waited. For every corrupt leader toppled, another would rise, convinced they were untouchable. Justice was not a finish line. It was a struggle renewed each day. One evening, as twilight filled the house, I sat at the dining table with my daughter. She had a workbook open, pages filled with characters. "Teach me more, Daddy," she said eagerly. I leaned over, guiding her small hand as she traced the lines of a Japanese phrase. She looked up, smiling, and I whispered the words as if they were a secret only for her. "Silence is the sharpest weapon." She repeated it softly, her eyes bright with understanding she was too young to fully grasp. But someday she would. And when she did, she would know why her father had chosen not to shout, not to rage, but to wait, to listen, and to strike when the time was right. As I closed the book, I felt the quiet settle around us like a shield. The war I had fought had ended, but the lessons remained. Greed, envy, arrogance, they would never disappear. But neither would the power of truth, patience, and the will to act when the world least expected it.